Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, when we get a listener request, it usually involves some pretty fascinating stuff. But this one's a real head scratcher. We're diving into the case of Elizabeth Santos. Based on a true crime podcast episode you sent over, it's got twists, turns, and more unanswered questions than a game of Clue gone wrong. Was Elizabeth's death a tragic accident, a desperate act, or something more sinister? That's what we're here to explore.
And that's exactly the approach we need to take here, analyzing not just what happened, but how the available information fits together. Or doesn't.
Yeah.
Because sometimes those inconsistencies are the most revealing parts of the story.
All right, so picture this. Ravenna Street, Anchorage, Alaska, August 8th, 2020. A seemingly normal neighborhood gets shaken up by a frantic 911 call from Let Hoagland Hall, who lives in a duplex with her son Desmond. The call concerns Let's friend, 37-year-old Elizabeth Santos, who is in a serious state of distress.
The initial reports from that morning are a tangled mess of potential explanations. Erratic behavior, a possible mental health crisis, maybe even a drug overdose. But the situation takes a dark turn when, at the hospital, it's discovered that Elizabeth has multiple stab wounds.
That's right, and you know me, I'm all about starting at the beginning, so let's rewind to that chaotic 911 call. Whoa!
Yeah.
You can practically feel the tension in Let's voice.
Right. She mentions Elizabeth having a mental breakdown, being hysterical, attacking her,
Whoa!
but denies any weapons being involved. Then, later on, she suggests Elizabeth might be off her meds and hasn't slept in days. It's almost as if she's throwing out every possible explanation without any clear direction. It's intriguing how Letta wavers between attributing Elizabeth's behavior to mental health issues, potential drug use, and even claims to have seen her take Benadryl, then later retracts that statement, saying she only assumed she did. These inconsistencies raise immediate red flags about the reliability of her account.
Okay, so the police arrive at the scene and find Elizabeth in a very distressed state. She's mumbling, spelling her name repeatedly, and can't communicate clearly. They see some injuries, but initially think they're self-inflicted scratches. They also note a pocket knife near the stairs. This is where I get hung up, because it wasn't until Elizabeth went into cardiac arrest in the ambulance, then again at the ER, that everyone realizes the extent of her injuries. She had multiple stab wounds. How did everyone miss that? It seems like a pretty significant oversight, especially since she was only wearing a robe.
This is where things get really interesting. Those missed stab wounds aren't just a case of someone not looking closely enough. They raise questions about the tunnel vision that can sometimes occur in emergency situations. Everyone seemed focused on the possibility of a drug overdose or mental health crisis. Even though Letcher herself insists Elizabeth wasn't using hard drugs, it's a prime example of how initial assumptions can shape perceptions and potentially derail an investigation.
And speaking of derailing the investigation, let's talk about the crime scene itself. While the police were there, Letta started cleaning up blood right in front of them. I get that she might have been worried about her home, but cleaning up a potential crime scene? Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
It's a significant misstep.
Yeah.
Even seemingly well-intentioned actions like that can compromise valuable evidence. Then there's that gap in time where Lett and Desmond were unsupervised at the house, before being taken to the police station. It raises serious questions about the integrity of the scene.
Right, like what happened during that unsupervised time. Then there's the whole thing with the knives. They find a pocket knife near the stairs, a steak knife in the living room, another steak knife under the sink, and even a Leatherman on a half wall. We're talking knives galore here. It's like a scene straight out of a horror movie.
The abundance of knives is intriguing on its own. But what's even more perplexing is the seemingly random selection of which ones were tested for blood and DNA. For instance, a pocket knife with a black, tar-like substance on it, potentially blood, was found in the garage, but wasn't tested at all. Meanwhile, blood was found on a steak knife in the living room, but not on the Leatherman. It begs the question, what criteria were used to determine which items were deemed important enough to test? And how can investigators be sure they didn't miss a crucial piece of evidence by not testing everything?
Okay, that's pretty disturbing, especially since we know now that some potentially crucial items were overlooked. Let's not forget the toxicology report, which throws a whole new wrench into the works.
Absolutely. While THC was found in Elizabeth's system, which wasn't surprising given her known weed use, the unexpected discovery was midazolam, a sedative typically used in surgeries, or to treat extreme agitation. It raises the question, where did this midazolam come from?
There's a possibility it was administered during her recent surgery, but a missing anesthesia record from the hospital makes it hard to confirm. Plus, there's the whole Benadryl situation that keeps popping up. Everyone was talking about Elizabeth potentially taking Benadryl, but a basic postmortem blood test doesn't detect the active ingredient in it.
A more comprehensive test was needed to determine if Benadryl or any other medications she might have been taking were in her system. But unfortunately, that wasn't done. We're left wondering if those missing pieces of the puzzle could have helped paint a clearer picture of Elizabeth's state of mind and her actions that morning.
So, we have a chaotic 911 call with conflicting accounts, a potentially compromised crime scene, a perplexing assortment of knives, and an incomplete toxicology report. It's no wonder this case is riddled with so many unanswered questions. It feels like we're just scratching the surface here.
It does feel that way, doesn't it? And that's before we even consider the autopsy, which lists the manner of death as undetermined. And, of course, there's the whole issue of the police investigation itself, or lack thereof.
Ugh. Right, the police investigation, which, from what we've gathered, seems about as clear as mud. We'll dive into that rabbit hole next.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we went on a short break, we were just getting started on unpacking the many unanswered questions surrounding Elizabeth Santos' death, and how those unanswered questions cast serious doubt on the official police investigation. Let's pick up where we left off and delve into one of the most perplexing aspects of this case, the question of suicide.
It's almost as if the investigation was put on hold as soon as the word suicide was uttered. But the medical examiner couldn't definitively say whether those stab wounds were self-inflicted, which makes this whole thing even more baffling. I mean, what exactly are investigators looking for when they're trying to determine if a stabbing was self-inflicted or not? What are the telltale signs?
Great question. Forensic experts look for a few key indicators, almost like a checklist, to help them piece together what might have happened. First, they look for what are called hesitation marks. Imagine someone hesitant, unsure, maybe even scared. They might make tentative, shallow cuts near the main wound, almost as if they're testing the waters before taking the plunge, so to speak.
Hesitation marks are like a red flag that someone might have been struggling with the decision to inflict those injuries.
Exactly. The second thing investigators look at is the presence of multiple stab wounds. This can be a bit tricky because it's also a hallmark of a homicidal stabbing. So while it doesn't automatically point to suicide, it's definitely a factor that needs to be taken into account. And then there's the issue of clothing. Studies have shown that victims of suicide typically don't stab themselves through their clothing. Now, remember, Elizabeth was only wearing a robe, so it's crucial to figure out if those wounds were inflicted through the fabric or directly onto her skin, unfortunately. The information we have doesn't really clarify this.
So many unknowns, so many missing pieces. And let's not forget that blood-soaked robe. It seems like a pretty significant detail that was initially dismissed as sweat by the police officers who first responded to the scene.
Right. I mean, how do you mistake that much blood for sweat? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It raises concerns about the thoroughness of the initial assessment and whether those responding officers truly considered all possibilities or just jumped to the most convenient conclusion.
And then there's Elizabeth's mental state in the days leading up to her death. Her boyfriend, Dustin, mentioned previous episodes of what he called manic behavior, suggesting a history of mental health challenges. But Elizabeth's family claims they didn't know about any serious mental health concerns.
Or unusual behavior. It's like everyone has a different version of the story.
That's the challenge with piecing together someone's mental state based solely on personal accounts. People's perceptions can be subjective. Memories can be fuzzy or influenced by grief. And sometimes there's a desire to protect someone's image even after they're gone. And let's not forget Desmond's account of Elizabeth acting strangely at his mom's house. The way he described it, she was reorganizing things, sending nonsensical texts, even running around naked outside. It paints a pretty disturbing picture. But even Desmond's observations are just one piece of this very complicated puzzle.
His account certainly raises questions about Elizabeth's behavior leading up to her death. But it also raises questions about Desmond himself. Why didn't he immediately share that unsettling encounter he had with Elizabeth with his mom or the police? What was he holding back? And why? It just adds another layer of mystery to this already tangled web.
So much of this feels like grasping at straws, trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. We have these glimpses into Elizabeth's behavior, but no clear picture of what was really going on with her mentally.
And that lack of clarity is further amplified by the missing pieces in the toxicology report. Without knowing what medications Elizabeth was taking, if any, or what other substances might have been in her system, it's practically impossible to accurately assess her mental state or figure out if her actions were influenced by external factors. It's like trying to solve a math equation without knowing all the variables. You might get a partial answer, but it won't be the complete picture.
Speaking of missing pieces, let's talk about the police investigation, or rather, the lack thereof. Elizabeth's family feels like the police weren't taking her case seriously, that they dismissed their concerns, and that the investigation itself was completely inadequate. It's hard to disagree with them when you look at how the investigation was handled.
It's difficult to see the logic in suspending an investigation simply because the medical examiner couldn't definitively rule out suicide. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not a dead end, that's just one piece of the puzzle. It feels like the investigation was halted prematurely, before all avenues were explored.
And then there's the whole issue of forensic testing, or the lack of it. They didn't test all the knives found at the scene, didn't conduct a comprehensive toxicology screening to see what else might have been in Elizabeth's system, and seemed to just dismiss potential evidence, like the blood-soaked robe, without a second thought. Honestly, it feels like they were trying to sweep the whole thing under the rug and just assume it was a suicide without doing their due diligence.
I think Elizabeth's family has every right to be frustrated. It's not about jumping to conclusions or pushing a narrative. It's about following the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads to uncomfortable truths.
And the explanations they gave for not doing more testing, that it wouldn't definitively prove or disprove anything, seems like a weak excuse. It's their job to investigate, to gather all the evidence, not pick and choose what they think is relevant.
You're right. They're supposed to be impartial fact finders, not judges and juries. Their job is to let the evidence guide them, not the other way around.
It feels like the investigators were so quick to accept the easiest explanation: suicide. That they overlooked or downplayed crucial evidence that didn't fit their narrative. And then they offered conflicting theories without any real evidence to back them up. Detective Bell said there was no evidence to suggest anyone else was involved, but then Sergeant Cross suggested the possibility of self-defense, even though Letney never claimed she was defending herself.
Those inconsistencies, along with the lack of a thorough investigation, really fuel the perception that the police were more concerned with closing the case quickly than with uncovering the truth. It creates a breeding ground for distrust and suspicion, especially when dealing with a grieving family seeking answers.
It's a truly unsettling situation, and I can't help but wonder if the lack of transparency and thorough investigation had something to do with Elizabeth herself. I mean, she wasn't a high-profile individual. She didn't have powerful connections. Do you think her case was treated differently because of that?
That's a valid concern, sadly. We often see disparities in how cases are investigated based on a victim's socioeconomic status, race, or social standing. While we can't say for sure if those factors influence the investigation in Elizabeth's case, it does raise important questions about systemic biases within the criminal justice system.
It's heartbreaking to think that someone's access to justice might be influenced by factors beyond their control. But thankfully, Elizabeth's family didn't give up. They pushed for answers, sought media attention, and brought her story to light.
They absolutely did.
Yeah.
And thanks to their unwavering dedication and love for Elizabeth, we're having this conversation today, scrutinizing the evidence and asking those tough questions.
Their commitment to uncovering the truth is inspiring. It's a powerful reminder that even when those in positions of authority fail to deliver justice, it's up to individuals to step up, advocate for the truth, and ensure that those who have been silenced have a voice.
It's a testament to the human spirit's resilience and the enduring power of love and loyalty. And it underscores the importance of holding those in power accountable for their actions, ensuring that every life, regardless of circumstance, is treated with dignity and respect.
This whole case feels like a giant puzzle with missing pieces. It's frustrating, confusing, and honestly a bit scary. We're left with more questions than answers. And I'm not sure if we'll ever have a clear picture of what truly happened to Elizabeth Santos. But we're not done yet. We'll continue exploring this compelling case after a short break. Join us as we delve into the potential avenues for further investigation and what might need to happen for this case to finally get the resolution it deserves.
We're back, and I have to say, diving into this case has been a whirlwind of emotions. It's frustrating, heartbreaking, and infuriating all at the same time. We've uncovered a lot of disturbing details and inconsistencies, but we're still left with so many unanswered questions about what really happened to Elizabeth Santos. It's definitely a case that stays with you. But amidst all the chaos and uncertainty, there's still a glimmer of hope. If this case were to be reopened, there are specific actions investigators could take that might shed light on the truth and bring some measure of peace to Elizabeth's family.
Okay. Let's talk about those potential avenues for further investigation. Where should they start? What needs to be re-examined?
The first and most obvious step is to address those glaring omissions in the initial forensic testing all the knives found at the scene, especially that pocket knife from the garage with the mysterious black substance on it could yield valuable clues. It might not definitively prove who inflicted the stab wounds, but it could help investigators eliminate possibilities and narrow down their focus.
It's mind-boggling to me that they wouldn't have tested everything in the first place, especially given how much emphasis was placed on the knives being readily available within the home.
You would think that would make them even more important to analyze. And then there's that comprehensive toxicology report we keep circling back to. Knowing what substances were in Elizabeth's system at the time of her death could provide crucial insights into her state of mind and behavior leading up to that fateful morning.
Right. It could reveal the presence of medications that might have interacted with other substances in her system, potentially explaining her erratic behavior. It seems like such a crucial piece of the puzzle that was just overlooked.
It really does. And beyond the forensic testing, re-interviewing all the key witnesses with a fresh perspective could be invaluable this time around, armed with the findings from those additional tests and a more critical eye for inconsistencies. Investigators might notice things they missed before.
I like that idea. Going back and talking to Dustin, everyone,
Yeah.
with new information and a more focused approach. It's like looking at a blurry picture and finally putting on your glasses. Suddenly, everything comes into focus.
Exactly. And then there's the physical evidence from the crime scene, specifically the blood-soaked robe. Instead of dismissing it as sweat, investigators should have analyzed those blood spatter patterns. That could have told them a lot about the position of Elizabeth's body, the sequence of events, and potentially even the type of weapon used.
It's incredible to me how much information can be gleaned from seemingly insignificant details, like the way blood splatters or the angle of a wound. It's like a silent language that can speak volumes if you know how to interpret it.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And don't forget the dashcam footage Elizabeth's family requested, but never received. Obtaining that footage, if it still exists, could be game-changing. It might capture crucial details that weren't included in the written reports, providing much-needed context, and perhaps even challenging the official narrative.
It's amazing how even a seemingly small detail, like dash cam footage, can potentially alter the course of an investigation. It just highlights how important it is to consider every possible angle and not dismiss anything without thorough examination.
Absolutely. Every piece of evidence, every detail, every inconsistency, it all contributes to the bigger picture.
I'm starting to see this whole case as a giant, multi-dimensional puzzle. You need all the pieces, all the perspectives, to get a clear understanding of what really happened.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just about finding the right answers. It's about asking the right questions and being willing to explore every possible path. It's about having the courage to challenge assumptions and dig deeper, even when things seem straightforward.
And even if,
That's right.
after all that, the manner of death remains undetermined, wouldn't there be value in knowing that every possible avenue was explored, that every stone was unturned? Wouldn't that at least provide some closure for Elizabeth's family?
Absolutely. For those who loved Elizabeth, the pursuit of truth and justice isn't just about finding a definitive answer. It's about honoring her memory, making sure her case isn't forgotten, and perhaps even preventing similar tragedies from happening in the future.
It's about acknowledging that Elizabeth was a real person, with a life, a story, and people who cared deeply about her. And she deserves justice, whatever that may look like.
Well said. And you know, even if this case isn't officially reopened, there's still value in what we've done here today. We've scrutinized the evidence, identified inconsistencies, and asked the tough questions. We've brought Elizabeth's story to light and encouraged others to think critically about the information they encounter.
That's right. We've reminded ourselves that sometimes. The most important investigations are the ones we conduct ourselves, armed with our own critical thinking skills, a healthy dose of skepticism, and the determination to uncover the truth.
And who knows, maybe our conversation today will inspire someone out there to take a closer look at this case, to dig a little deeper, to ask those uncomfortable questions. Maybe, just maybe. That's all it takes to get the ball rolling again. And finally, bring some closure to Elizabeth's family.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in seeking justice, in holding those in power accountable, and in giving voice to those who have been silenced. Sometimes, all it takes is a spark of curiosity, a willingness to question the official narrative, and the courage to speak up for what's right. And who knows, maybe that spark will ignite a flame that leads to real change.
Beautifully put. And as we conclude our deep dive into Elizabeth Santos' case, we want to leave you with one final thought. Never underestimate the power of asking questions, of seeking truth, and of demanding justice. Even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles, never give up hope.
Remember, the details of this case, along with links to additional resources, are available in our show notes. And if you have any thoughts or insights you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Until next time, keep diving deep, keep asking questions, and never stop seeking the truth.